My subject today, Suzuki Roshi's Zen, is the topic that he might not have agreed with. Once, when being interviewed about his life story, he began by saying, "If my life is understood in this way, all is lost." He also often said that he didn't want our Zen to be Japanese Soto Zen, although he offered no advice on how to go about making our Zen American. Most likely, he only wanted us to continue to practice so that it could take whatever shape it would as a result. It was clear from the start that American Zen would differ from Japanese Zen in two ways at least. One was that men and women would practice in the same monastery. A personal consequence of this, of course, was that Jane and I were able to meet at Tassajara and get together there. The other difference is that here in the US, men and women equally could be priests. Traditionally, in most Buddhist countries, only celibate males could be ordained, although in Japan, the post-feudal government had forced Buddhist priests to marry in order that they would look more like Christianity, so that Japan would not be occupied like the rest of Asia had been. Suzuki Roshi had then been born into a temple and had been expected to marry, which he did. About 10 years after the war, he had been living as a widower with 4 children, but just before coming to the US in 1958, he remarried, and his new wife stayed in Japan for another 3 years to care for his youngest child. And as he was dying in 1971, Roshi asked her to remain in the San Francisco Zen Center building for another 20 years. And she stayed there even longer than that. Suzuki Roshi back then might have surprised some of the few Americans who knew about Zen, for he didn't push students to get enlightened, as the few books available on Zen at that time suggested he would. What Roshi focused on was doing zazen. To him, nothing was more important than sitting regularly and continued to do so. This was the way to realize that oneself and everyone else and everything else is Buddha nature. Suzuki Roshi also understood that we had to let nature be revealed without any interference on our part. No one else being able to teach us who we really are, as we already were that, if unaware of it. He accordingly told us that after listening to a Dharma talk in the Zendo, we ought to forget everything we had heard. Knowledge would just get in the way. As might be suspected, Suzuki Roshi was very kind to his students. For instance, he never scolded me or told me that I had done something wrong. I did later read him say that teachers shouldn't criticize students who had a glass half-empty attitude towards life, as I did, regretfully did, which could be taken to explain why I never held Suzuki Roshi in awe as so many others did. To me, he was just nicer to be with and more natural than anyone I had ever met. characteristics that are consistent with the way he taught. He also said that teachers should watch their disciples, but as much as possible, not interfere in their lives. We should emulate him in this. While it may be easier to see the value of the first two treasures of Buddhism, the Buddha and the Dharma, the teacher and what is taught, without the third treasure, the Sangha, practice might not even be taking place. Teachers having no reason to be there with no one for them to teach. The most important attribute for a Sangha to have is to be harmonious. Sensing this gives members emotional space to practice, but its lack can result in some deciding to leave. To maintain this harmony, Sangha members should have faith in Buddha nature and follow Roshi's lead in respecting it in each other. Suzuki Roshi also said that if teachers felt the need to say something to a member, they shouldn't do it at the moment they first felt that, nor in the presence of others, nor should they raise their voice in doing so. At another time, he mentioned that one way that a teacher could correct a member in public was by correcting someone else, an older member, who would recognize that he or she wasn't being referred to. Yet a further way for a teacher to pass advice to a student was by having another teacher do it, which may have happened to me. When I had been director at Tassajara for a few years, Katagiri Roshi, at that time sensei, came to me and said that there had been complaints about me. It was decided that I shouldn't be director anymore. Instead, he told me that I was to become Suzuki Roshi's Jisha, or personal attendant. As you might imagine, that period turned out to be the most wondrous in my life, or at least until I fell for Jane and she accepted me. Roshi maybe wouldn't have guessed that she and I would become teachers together. Thank you. Here is that teacher. Ta-da! We saw it. Just let me turn it shows. Oh, you want to get rid of the what's behind my head? Yeah. Crazy, isn't it?
I don't know why yours is displaying this, but look how much space is over your head.
Oh, I see. Well, anyway, it's not on here, so that's what's important.
Take
the letters
off.
This is the one that's related.
Here we go.
Take the letters off. Take the letters off.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah. Okay. Anybody have any comments or questions here or here in the Zendo with us? Yes, Mike?
I think this personally only because as a teacher, when you asked me to do Jokai, I was caught off guard because you're like, you're doing Jokai, aren't you? You're going to take the precepts. So it was like, really? You know, you kind of surprised me into thinking that, wow, I'm really up to that level to where you think I can do this. And that's you know, I guess it is part of teaching. I taught in a classroom for a while, teaching a bunch of guys who were worth millions of dollars how to work a computer program. I had long hair and a big old earring in my ear. And I just learned to treat them like they were just regular people, but pay attention to who's doing what, you know, and getting along. And so I just wanted to say that your talk reminded me of the day that you, in the Zendo, just looked at me and said, "You're taking the precepts, aren't you?"
Well, that was accepting you, wasn't it?
That was a
That wasn't, that
headline.
wasn't,
He said that.
that wasn't actually, I mean, of course it was giving you advice. I'm fudging a bit. But anyway, no, but that's the teacher accepting. Not, that wasn't giving me bad advice.
No, that's how I felt. It was
Yeah.
like, okay,
Yeah.
I've actually, it was kind of a feeling like I've arrived.
Exactly. Yeah, we had, well, you, here's the path. Whoa. And here's arrived. Anybody else? Yes, Sandy?
I really enjoyed your talk. It was nice to hear your experiences, and I wanted to thank you for sharing that because it seems like um, we're discouraged from sharing some of our personal, experiences, and in others where we're, a- we're pushed to actually share. So it was a very interesting talk. Thank you,
Thank you. Thank you, Sandy. Yeah.
Mitch.
I'm not used to sharing my foibles in that way, but I couldn't help myself. That's the only examples that I have. I was I was forced to confess. Yeah. Yes, Mitch.
Okay, this is sort of kind of a, it's not exactly in the line with the Dharma talk with Teisho. I heard and I read someplace that they forced the Zen priests to get married. They felt that once they were married, they wouldn't be as powerful in the community as they had been. It was almost a way of weighing them down and trying to lessen their influence. I don't I read
That
if that's true or not, I have no idea.
Yes, it is, Mitch. That's true. I didn't explain it thoroughly, but yes, that was indeed it. They were trying to raise up Shinto. Shinto, of course, was prior to Buddhist in Japan, but when Buddhists came, it became the main religion, and even Shinto became a part of Buddhism. That is, Shinto temples, Shinto not temples, Shinto shrines were inside Buddhist precincts, and so the Shinto priests had very little power at all. And so when they were giving power, and they were separated from the temples, they were very, very happy. They're very, very happy, and as you know, we lived on property that had once been property of the temple where Dogen had trained as a boy, and there was a couple of shrines in the large shrines in the temple, and it was a very famous kind of scene in the village when the Shinto priests went up to the abbot of the big temple and demanded for the keys. I don't know whether they had locks anyhow, but that's how they explained it anyway. So yeah, that's what happened. Yeah.
So another comment that if I could take one more,
Sure, of course you can.
uh, you know, um, Suzuki Roshi is wanting an American Zen, not to copy or try to take a culturally formed Soto Zen and try to make it fit our American ways, and that should evolve on its own. But a lot of religions um, have been um, diluted by trying to market them, changing the religion to market it so it would be more acceptable. And that's something that, because I've read these statements by Suzuki or read about that, and it's always bothered me, and I've never resolved that issue for myself.
I don't think he was ever interested in marketing. I mean, as you know, I think what he didn't want is that Japanese Zen is full of positions and politics, and he didn't want American Zen to get involved in that kind of stuff. I mean, Jane and I once had a friend who was called Gozen Sama, which means the one who came before, and he was the head of the marathon monks in the mountain behind us, and he was really involved even in Japanese politics, because they would come to him and ask his advice. He was good at giving advice. My favorite story was one time he was trying to rebuild the temple where the founder had lived of Tendai in Japan. He lived in that temple, and he was rebuilding it, but he had to give a fire ceremony on a morning when a tree sale that was going on in Nagoya, which is about 150 miles away, and so minute he finished the ceremony, he jumped in his car and he raced to buy these trees he wanted to put in the garden. But he got caught by a camera. And so he got out of paying his ticket by writing a letter to the third most important man in the Japanese government to fix his ticket. That's a ridiculous story. But that's how politics can get involved. And he really didn't want that. So he didn't want to get those cultural things that will happen. Of course, these kind of things will probably, a little bit happened in America. We've had our problems. Yes?
Could you get rid of some tickets for me? But I did have a real question.
Yes.
I was very interested, you said that when you became Suzuki Roshi's personal assistant.
Yeah.
How was that? I would like to hear more about that. That seemed very interesting because it had a very positive effect on you.
Yes, it did. Well, I never really thought of it that way before, Mark, that it had a positive effect. But I guess, I mean, I guess it did. I mean, Jane had been his assistant prior to that. So a year earlier, actually. And Jane actually had more experience than I did, because I was the assistant at Tassajara, and Jane was the assistant in both things. And maybe she'll tell you some stories herself. She has her own stories.
Yes, I heard the one about how you moved Suzuki Roshi around and he ended up knocking over the lantern and breaking it.
Yeah, that one, yes, that's right. That had what happened with Jane. I've told you the story about when I had the cold, right? Remember that story about when I had the cold? I'd get up when the bell rang and hurry over to his cabin. We all lived in cabins, and I'd light the lanterns and sometimes a fire. He had a little teeny pot-belly stove, but when I got there, I had a bad head cold, and I didn't complain about the head cold, but obviously it was obvious. And he said, "Sit down." And Suzuki Roshi didn't drink. In Japanese culture, it's kind of a funny thing. You either like sake or you like sweets. And people actually divide themselves in that way. And Suzuki Roshi loved sweets. He was crazy for sweets. There's one time he was so much that way that in his temple when he was like 14 years old, the sugar was kept on the top shelf of the kitchen, and he was short, and he would climb up there and scoop out sugar with his hand and eat the sugar. But he didn't indulge in sugar when we knew him, actually, at all. But anyway, he didn't like to drink. But even so, he pulled out a bottle of sake out of some place I didn't know where it had been, and he took a cup, like a cup from like we would have a soup bowl, and he poured the sake in the cup, and he put the cup on top of the stove, and then after it had heated up, he took an egg. I didn't know it had eggs either. He had an egg though, and he broke the egg and he put it in the sake and he whipped it. And then he said, "Drink this." So I took there was that much, right? One good serving of sake. So I didn't gulp it down, but I did it in kind of one motion kind of thing. Or when I put the bowl down, I just drank. He said, "Okay, go to bed." So I did. I went to bed. I laid there in bed with my warm body all warm with the sake. And by evening, my cold had ended.
Wow, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, I used to, scrub it. Jane, this is one thing Jane couldn't get to do. I used to scrub his back in the hot springs bath. He would have his bath in the like 3 o'clock. And so I would go down and be his attendant and take care of that. And we would talk about things together. It was just, as I said, he was really, really, you felt it without justifying, thinking about it at that time. But it was just, conversation was open. And it wasn't a miracle, but it was really a relief. And so that was really, in my case, I also at that point, I was quite lucky. I didn't have to manage anymore. Actually, I was, at the time, I was president, so I had other jobs. But anyway, so I was able to do the translation for the Heart Sutra. That took place during that time. I translated the small chants that we do. I made the Windmill, which is the 3 times a year at that point magazine of the center, and just basically could do a lot of things that I wouldn't have had time to do. So it was, but just being with him was just really, really, really nice. One time I did have a kind of to tell another opposite story. I'd had not a enlightenment experience, but I had some kind of experience. I can't remember what it was, but I had some kind of experience. So I was telling him as he was leaving the cabin to go to Zazen. I guess maybe it was not to go to Zazen, but to go back for evening Zazen. And he looked at me and said, "Oh, we have those kind of delusions all the time." And that was the end of my, I don't think it was enlightenment, but I thought it was kind of special anyway, even though now I can't remember what it was. So I really, I really, really, really like Suzuki Roshi. And he liked me too, and he liked Jane too. He liked the students actually, because he once said, "There's no student that I'm not attached to any of my students." That's what he said. I'm not that attached to any of my students, he said, and that also was very true. He didn't have favorites, but we were all together, and we were more than this bunch here, but we were still not large. So
We all loved him.
yeah, we all loved him. Yeah. We'd have meetings, and he had a very hard time with our meetings because when we had a meeting, we all fought together. There'd be about 8 or 10 of us, right? There'd be a board meeting, and we'd fight and we'd quarrel. And he said he hated to hear his disciples argue like that. But more than likely, during the meeting, he would be asleep. But how, or the eyes would be closed. But when a decision was made, if he didn't like the decision, he didn't talk during it. He'd say, "No, we're not going to do it that way," and that would be the end. We wouldn't argue. We wouldn't argue that way. Yeah. So anyway, we were lucky. Yeah. Okay, thank you for listening to me talk. Any other questions or anything else? Okay.